Hi, my name is Linnea.
I'm Bezia.
And I'm Linnea, and this is episode number 18 of the Lemma Journal Club.
What is the Lemma Journal Club?
The Lemma Journal Club is the show where we read every paper to tell you if you need to read it. You probably do.
We have a terrific paper for you today. Today we are talking about the dynamics of a Volvox embryo turning itself inside out. Volvox is a multicellular algae, or I guess it's a bunch of algae that have come together to make a bigger creature. What is a Volvox, Linnea?
Yeah, Volvox is a multicellular algae. It came from colonies of Chlamydomonas, but I think this is the first one where they're sure that it's multicellular because it has division of labor, it has germ cells, and it has somatic cells.
Would you say that this is an algae paper?
I would say that this is an algae paper, yeah.
Would you say that this is a global warming paper?
No, I would not say this is a global warming paper.
Yeah, it's an algae paper, but it's not a global warming paper. Why did you pick this paper?
I picked this paper because I was talking to Fred McIntosh about Volvox when I was visiting Rice last week. And he said he knew about it because of this guy, Raymond Goldstein's work. And it reminded me that there's an overlap between the active matter, soft matter physics community and the algal community that doesn't really get highlighted very often. And I was looking for a paper that would be easy to read and easy to pick. And so I saw the title of the paper and I was like, yeah, looks good. I'm not going to spend 5 hours picking a paper. I'm going to go with something that I saw, I want to read, and let's talk about it.
This paper also has as a middle author, Pierre Haas. The first author is Stephanie Höhn. Pierre Haas came and gave a talk a couple of years ago at Princeton about this system, and we went out to coffee with him.
Yeah.
So this is actually a paper that we've thought about quite a lot, and it's, when you think about it, extremely similar to my work.
Yeah, in some ways very similar to your work and still overlapping with my work, which is, again, another theme that we're trying to highlight in the Journal Club. So it turned out to be a pretty good paper on that front.
Here's my complaint about the paper.
Sure.
This is a theory paper.
This is primarily a theory paper. I wonder if you watched the videos.
I watched the video, singular.
Yeah, but it's a long video. They just put all the videos in one video.
You said when you picked this paper, when you were telling me, oh, let's do this paper instead of this other paper because this one has videos and then we can put the videos on the YouTube. I was like, oh, great, it has videos. And then I saw that it's one video that we're just going to play on loop on YouTube. I was a little bit disappointed. And I thought it was going to be an experimental paper. But I do wish I had seen this paper before. I wish I had read this paper in the first year of my postdoc. It has two things in it that I had to learn on my own that I could have just read this paper and I would have known immediately.
Okay.
One is in the very first paragraph, they say this invagination of the Volvox. So the Volvox basically is like a weird ball with like a hollow dimple, and then it can flip itself inside out.
Yeah.
And it does that by contracting the inner side of some cells and expanding the outsides of some cells to make like a little change in curvature that flips itself out. It's the How Did the Flytrap Snap paper.
Yeah. Again,
now in algae, right? So this is, this is written in 2015. They have new technology. They're able to do more things than they were in the How Did the Flytrap Snap paper that we covered several episodes ago. In the first paragraph, they say processes like this pervade tissue formation, including ventral furrow formation in Drosophila, as well as neurulation and optic cup formation in vertebrates. When I was trying to find other systems in which to prove that my apical constriction event has more energy or has more mitochondrial ATP production, I kind of did a random walk around species and systems and eventually came upon ventral furrow formation in Drosophila, neurulation in the chick, and optic cup formation in the mouse. Optic cup formation, I found by accident. I was looking for something else. And so it's interesting, just in the first paragraph, they literally hit my three systems that I ended up using to prove what I was talking about was true. So I could have just read the first paragraph of this and that would have given me my systems.
Yeah.
That's thing one. And then thing two is way down, equation 3, they have this energy that they minimize, which is basically the stretching energy of the Volvox plus the bending energy of the Volvox. And I have, with NVIDIA on a blackboard, derived this exact equation. not a similar equation, this exact equation, independently, never having seen this equation. I say I have, Envita did most of it. I just sat there for 2 or 3 hours talking through it with her. I could have just read this paper. The explanation of the derivation is pretty okay if you take the time to read it. Then I would have had this equation. So we have this analytical solution and this numerical solution in the paper that we do. It's all stuffed into the supplementary. Nobody even knows that we did it. It was interesting to go through this paper and be like, oh, I did exactly what they're talking about 10 years later.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was why this process is so common. So they're showing it in Volvox. It's a huge, dramatic shape change. And they say that it happens all the time in development in other organisms. So yeah, why is it such? Here, it doesn't even seem that necessary, right? Like you could have put all the cells in the opposite orientation when you're developing, and then like have some signal to grow the flagella at a certain time to make them motile. So why is this mechanical deformation so prevalent in development?
So there seem to be certain geometric motifs in biology, such as branching networks, or in this case, thin sheets. Right? Thin sheets seem to be a motif in biology, right? Your skin is a thin sheet. Your membranes are thin sheets. Development has a lot to do with the bending of thin sheets. The topology of thin sheets is actually like surprisingly constrictive, right? When you have the topology of a bending line or a bending 3D cube, you have very few constrictions and you can do all sorts of things. But when you have the bending of a thin sheet, you have this rule, thin sheets are easy to bend and hard to stretch. And you also have like topology lock-ins of like, is this shaped like a potato chip or like a Frisbee? And you're kind of locked into those things and you have to make some really big deformations to get out of those lock-ins. Because it's a motif in biology and because it has strict mathematical constrictions on its topology, I think we get to see the same story over and over again throughout all of biology. That like, hey, are you constructing something out of a thin sheet? Okay, then you work by these, 4 or 5 mechanisms. And one of them is one of the tricks a cell has is it can constrict one side of the thin sheet or the other side of the thin sheet to apply forces to change the inherent curvature, this kind of thing. And that applies the same set of topological and geometric changes to the thin sheet. So it's a nice overlap of the biology has a really strong motif and the topology has pretty heavy boundaries.
Constraints,
here.
yeah.
Constraints.
Yeah.
I said constrictions earlier. I meant constraints. And then, because it's also a thing that we've been thinking about in just like, you take a piece of paper and you bend it and you fold it, or you take a pizza and you fold it and you see the pizza, right? Because it's a thing that we think about at the macroscopic scale, we're very equipped to talk about it, right? Like a thing that we're not equipped to talk about that this paper doesn't do, that I try to do in my paper, and again, nobody will ever notice it because we've shoved it into the supplementary. It has one sentence in the paper, is this is a purely elastic model.
Yeah.
The system itself is viscoelastic, right? The cells get to rearrange, the stresses get to dissipate. We talk about it a little bit. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so this was another thing I wanted to talk about, which is, how true is that in Volvox that the cells get to rearrange? In most plants, they don't rearrange. They say somewhere here like that at least the cytoplasmic bridges are rearranging. But I thought that one of the things that made this a simpler system was that you lack cell rearrangement.
Yeah, so the cells don't have to strictly rearrange in order to also qualify as a viscoelastic, right? The stresses need a way to relax.
Yeah.
Right. And they talk about the stresses relax, and they can kind of quantify that a little bit. Let me just read the sentence that they talk about. The sources of dissipation in such a system are myriad. Will we postpone a detailed discussion? And they cite 32, which I didn't look at.
Thumbs down. It's unpublished work.
And it never got published?
I don't know. It doesn't, how am I supposed to find out? It's just the name Pierre, Haas, and R.E. Goldstein, unpublished.
That's annoying. We note that the hydrodynamic resistance associated with the velocity gradients at the dimple edges scales as a pretty nasty equation. It's not that nasty. Again, they cite this unpublished paper, where mu is the fluid viscosity. Hence, there is a independent snap-through speed, an E-independent snap-through speed. I'm forgetting what E is.
E is like the length of the shell.
Yeah, it has a more specific meaning, right? E is the distance from the posterior pole to the bend region. is strictly what it is. So it's from the bottom of the Volvox up to the point where it's mushrooming to flip itself inside out. It's probably what you meant, but they've only got 3 like real variables that they're tracking in this paper. So
I actually found the definition of E a little confusing, that they say the distance E was separately measured for both embryo halves and then averaged.
Yeah, so if you look at figure...
So they're doing halves like vertically, or they're doing halves... They're only looking at the bottom half, that's the constricting mushroom half, and they're doing quarters and averaging the quarter, or are they doing halves, the constricting half and the not constricting half, and averaging those two?
I think experimentally it's a light sheet.
Yeah.
So they're literally imaging half of the Volvox at a time, and then they have to either rotate the sample to image the other half, or they have to have a second camera image the other half.
Yeah.
And then when you try to stitch them together, you get some interesting artifacts such that you might want to only analyze half of it. But the other thing is, from looking at figure 4F, the way that they've drawn F, G, H, and I makes me think that they are taking from the Z-axis where the Z is pointing straight up, they're just taking one plane, or one half face of the Volvox and the other half face of the Volvox. So G is kind of an example curve of what they're drawing.
Yeah, okay.
The system does have some viscous dissipation. What you get from viscous dissipation, like why I try to tell people, we should be doing viscoelastic simulations, is you get a time scale of the deformation. So they know experimentally that the inversion of Volvox takes about an hour. They don't recapitulate that anywhere through this theory. You can't recapitulate timescales through an elastic theory. And so the reason to go viscoelastic is you get a timescale out of your simulation. Viscoelastic is, I don't know how you do it analytically, so you really have to go simulation. In 2015, it's pretty early to be able to do these heavy simulations, right? I think we're really just getting there right now to be able to do these viscoelastic simulations. You get a timescale, and thus you can really strictly prove or disprove certain viscoelastic models, which is very beautiful. Here they try to do this thing, which everyone tries to do, which is they've got an elastic-only model, and they're trying to prove or disprove bits of their elastic model by the qualitative shape that their elastic model makes versus the qualitative shape that the Volvox makes. And I personally feel, and I've talked about this before, that there's too much futzing room here to really say anything hard about the form of the elasticity for the model. And I stick with that there's too many degrees of freedom. You can always kind of futz with things the way that you want. And there's also too many degrees of freedom in the biology, where you could be like, there's an extra dimple here, and that's only predicted by this particularly weird elastic model. Okay, but it could be that actually that dimple is caused by a completely different process that had nothing to do with what you were trying to study. That there's a lot of degrees of freedom in both the physics and the biology that make me want to go to viscoelastic simulations where the time scale is like a really strong constraint to find out if you're right or wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but their argument for switching or like considering, I don't know, you're saying that they're considering a viscoelastic model in this second to last paragraph.
I'm saying that it's not, at no point does anyone say, this is not viscoelastic, it's only elastic, right? Everything to some extent can be described as a viscoelastic. They're not even arguing that the viscoelasticity isn't important. The general thing is like, we're not going to talk about it because we can't do it.
Yeah.
And you can't do it. So shut up about it.
But the thing that they say that I found interesting in this second to last paragraph was that like a conventional elastic, they call it snap through model, does not proceed at a constant speed. And so what they are able to measure, and I think fairly convincingly in figure 2A, right, is that this process is advancing at a constant speed.
Yeah, this is the Venus fly.
So was the Venus flytrap also constant speed?
So here it's not at a constant speed. It has like speed 1 and then speed 2 here. Right?
Yeah. But so
the Venus flytrap had a speed 1, speed 2, and speed 3. It had a slow, fast, slow to its closure.
Okay. When I read this sentence, the sudden increase in the speed of posterior inversion when K star peaks or kappa star peaks is reminiscent of a mechanical snap through, as suggested in earlier work on type A inversion. Yet conventional snap-throughs of elastic materials do not proceed at constant speed. Here, we consider a possible explanation for the constant speed in the most parsimonious of settings, that of the snap-through of the Pogorelov dimple. And then I got a little lost here.
Yeah, it just seems to me they say conventional snap-throughs of elastic materials do not proceed at a constant speed. And then they immediately talk about a dimple.
Conventional snap through that proceeds at a constant speed?
Yeah.
Okay. And what I thought they were saying in this paragraph is that they didn't expect it to be linear with time. They expected some other form of that equation based on a purely elastic model. And so that's what made them introduce some idea of dissipation.
Sure. The snap-through of a pulmonar dimple of depth E on an elastic spherical shell of radius R and thickness H. And then they say, okay, so in order to have a constant speed on that dimple, we would need to have balanced bending and stretching at the dimple edge. And then I think they say that they need dissipation to make this work.
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying with all this unpublished stuff, which
Okay.
they don't really get into in a satisfying way.
A scaling argument balancing bending and stretching of the dimple edge shows that the elastic driving force at this snap-through scales as the elasticity times the times the thickness to the 5/2 power times the depth to the 1/2 power over the radius. We note that the resistance associated with the velocity gradients at the dimple edge scales as the viscosity times the potential energy, I'm assuming is what U is.
I think U is the speed.
Geez, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Times the speed. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Times the depth, E to the 1/2 power, times the radius to the 1/2 power, or just divided by the depth times the radius square root, where mu is the fluid viscosity. Hence, there is a depth-independent snap-through speed, U, so you're correct that that's the speed, which goes roughly as the elastic modulus times the thickness to the 5/2 over the viscosity times the radius to the 3/2. This argument cannot rule out other dissipation or cell intrinsic mechanisms. So they do this kind of unit analysis thing very briefly to try to, which is again very similar to the Venus flytrap snap. The data that they are taking this argument based off of, figure 2, where they have minutes versus this deformation E, it's supposed to take an hour for this thing to complete its wrapping. They show the first 20 minutes and the next 20 minutes. This doesn't appear to be the timescale of a full flip.
Of the full flip. Yeah.
And then the data here is noisy enough that I am not convinced that...
Oh, you're not convinced that it's actually linear there?
Yeah, that if you take any complicated curve, it's going to look linear at a short enough timescale. And then they haven't averaged these curves together. The curves look quite different. I would expect it's kind of this Dan thing of like anything locally averaged enough, or anything locally averaged enough is going to be kind of Gaussian looking, right? That if you took everything after 0 minutes, you might get a kind of fake Gaussian looking curve, just because that's sometimes how math leads you, even when that's not what the data actually says. And there's no fit here saying what is the probability that this is actually linear, because again, this isn't an experimental paper really, although this is experimental data. But this is really, I think, a paper written by theorists. And so they don't do error bars. They don't do probabilities. They don't say how decisive their findings are. They just do unit fitting unit analysis. Not that I think anything's wrong with that. This is all fine. I should say, this is a PRL paper. So this is a very short paper.
Yeah.
As I say for very short papers, you should, if you're listening to this, you should open the paper and try to read it yourself. It's, it's a little bit mathy, I think, for a lot of people, but it's a fairly easy read. And if you force yourself to look at their diagrams and realize what the
different
variables
quantities mean,
you can get through the math as long as you have just a little bit of calculus under you. And even if you don't, you can get through most of the math. PRL papers are extremely short by design. Lenny and I wrote a PRL paper, 2-page paper. That's the page limit. I think maybe 3-page paper is the page limit.
It got rejected.
It got rejected. We only had 2 reviewers. One reviewer said nothing. The second reviewer said, "This is too short." And I would like to find that reviewer and shake them violently and be, what do you mean it's too short? It's PRL. We can't make it longer.
I do feel like this is a classic PRL paper where they've done one experiment, they do some analysis like to capture the results, and it's a very short, neatly packaged story.
I just feel like this is exactly what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
We had exactly this amount of data. We packaged it in exactly this way, and we just encountered an idiot. And then the editors aren't vetting for the idiots. Like, this is too short is not an appropriate feedback from a reviewer.
Yeah, it's okay. It found a home. It got
found
out
a home.
there.
Yeah. But we had to make it much longer for its newer home.
Oh, I thought the biggest pain was that the new home wanted the methods first.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
And that was just like not the way we wrote the paper. And so a huge pain to like years later put the methods first and rewrite the results section so that it wasn't like it flowed okay.
That was a pretty serious rewrite because we had such a clean idea. If it's going to be in PRL, it's going to look like this. We submitted to PRL. PRL doesn't have biophysicists anymore. It's 2025, right? The biophysicists all got shoved out of physics. So they don't have anyone to review shit anymore. And so you just end up with lunatics.
But Cliff all the time says, oh, that would make a really nice PRL paper when people have just like a small, like a one-off experiment with a tiny theory.
Yeah, biophysicists, if you're listening, don't submit to PRL. It's not our place anymore. The physics community kind of killed it.
I don't know if I agree.
That you would have a student and you'd encourage them to submit to PRL?
I don't know.
I wouldn't. I really think that like...
There's no one to review is your complaint?
I would love to bring biophysics back to PRL.
Yeah.
But I think that the editorial board on PRL is very dusty, as certain people would say, and don't know what the game is anymore, that they've lost their way on what the journal is, that biophysics is held to a standard such that you have to have really long stories. Like people just ask in review.
I just don't think that's
for supplement.
I don't think that's like good.
Yeah, I don't think it's good.
And so I think that encouraging people to do PRL is like, just if you're a young graduate student and you've got a little bit of data and you need to write up a story to like learn how that works and like learn something about your system and gain some intuition, I think writing a PRL style paper is good. And why not?
Writing a PRL style paper is good. A short paper is good. We love the PRL style. But would you, knowing what PRL is like now, encourage one of your students to do that? Because it wasted about a year of our life, right? And it really was a dead end where they didn't even understand what we were trying to submit, right?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't had a good experience with any journal. So I can't not submit. I mean, like we could go the hard way of just only preprint all the time, but that seems impossible, right? And so I can't not submit to any journal.
Sure.
I'm not going to encourage my graduate students to do that because I don't think that's good for their careers.
But
so I would encourage them to submit to PRL.
You would encourage them to submit to PRL?
If there was a PRL style paper, I would try it again.
Okay. I don't think I would.
I think we have too few numbers, right? We've only submitted so many papers in our lives. The other PRL paper that I submitted went okay.
Okay. It is a bit of like when you're talking about a journal, in this case, what you're really talking about is the editor that you got assigned to.
Yeah.
What I really need to be doing is memorizing editors' names for
And the editors turn over. It's been years since we submitted to PRL.
But I don't have the problem with PRL is the reviewers. Not that there's an individual bad reviewer, but the lack of reviewers.
Yeah. I mean, there's now this PRX Life, which maybe is a better place to submit for biophysics stuff.
PRX Life is pretty weird though, right? Because the PRX was already like a new thing.
Yeah.
And then to iterate on the new thing immediately, like, I'm pretty happy that PRX Life did not exist while I was doing my PhD. And I definitely think that but PRX Life is a fairly long format, right? It's again that biology papers have a tendency to bloat while they're in review.
Yeah. But I like Ned has done a few nice papers in PRX Life that aren't incredibly long. And I think that that's another option for this
PRX
kind of
Life
paper.
Is an interesting
but we're
thing.
Way...
Maybe.
Yeah.
This is something that I think about a lot is that like when I read a PRL paper, I'm like, man, I really like the PRL format. I really like what they're going for. I feel like they've lost their way. But 2015 PRL...
Yeah, it was great.
1995 to 2015 PRL is like the golden age to me of, I'm reading a PRL paper. Awesome.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then PRL essentially became like a...
It's just...
journal that covers how you make transistors, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know when the last time I read a PRL paper was.
I still love the idea that there needs to be some major turnover. And when that turnover happens, you're not going to know that it happens unless you're really watching things. Okay,
so one of the things that I enjoyed about this paper is that we have built a light sheet in our basement.
Yeah.
And one of the few things we've been able to image with this light sheet is Volvox.
Yeah.
And we've been racking our brains for an experiment we could do with a single laser line and these Volvox. So now we can take high temporal resolution images of Volvox, but what can we measure? What experiment can we do? So here they had built that microscope and they did this experiment only with chlorophyll autofluorescence. And so they're really just getting like the purely mechanical, none of the biological side of things. And I don't think it answers our question because obviously they've already done this paper. And I thought it was a nice paper, but I don't find it intellectually stunning.
We can do the same thing, but with a viscoelastic model, right? I have the code built up to do literally this. Right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. But would you be excited about that experiment?
No, I'm generally not excited about, let me put it this way. I think the unit analysis is like a beautiful way to think about these problems.
Yeah.
And that everything that you do on top of that, I don't really understand what the long-term goal is. There are corners of viscoelastic modeling that I think could be interesting, but that's not what anybody's doing, right?
Yeah.
And so I
think we talked about this with Pierre when he came. Like we went to Small World all together, right? And we were like, so what do we learn from these viscoelastic models, or what do we learn from these elastic sheets?
That I think is interesting, right? When you come down to a viscoelastic model, one way to view a viscoelastic model is these dashpot models. Mm-hmm. So, you can make an infinite amount of viscoelastic models. Some of them have words for them, like the standard linear solid model and stuff. Others of them are just you've created a crazy network and you're saying that's how it molecularly works. What you don't do ever is say this biological system is vastly better represented by this particular viscoelastic model than these 20 other viscoelastic models. And you don't do that because getting the mechanical data to inform what your different dashpot model parameters would be is incredibly difficult, right? It requires a huge amount of rheology done in very particular ways. But to fight, get that data, make those myriad of simulations, which is also incredibly technically difficult. But me and Anvita built something that I think is very good at it. I think other people are probably about to build things that are very good at it. And to say, hey, it's this dashpot model and not this, it's pore elastic rather than standard linear solid, or, it's really
it's changing through time.
Or it's changing through time.
Which would be a cool result.
I think that kind of thing is really cool. I think, and Pierre Haas walked through it a little bit, that there are particular geometric instabilities that are not so commonly looked at thin sheets in topology that do exist in biology. And those can be cool as well. But if it can be brought back to unit analysis, and it can be brought back to thin sheets are easy to bend but hard to stretch, it's beautiful. We know it. This is 2015. I think this is kind of the end of when people should have stopped talking about this. And if you do something now, or if we were to do something now, it needs to be new. It's got to look at timescales. It's got to look at energy. And it's got to really come down to if you're going to go through all this numerical shit, you really got to say something profound, because the numerical stuff, what are you doing with it? Right?
Yeah. How can you relate it back to the actual experiments and distinguish your possible models?
I want to talk about figure 1E, because I think you know this system a little bit. Figure 1E draws this curvature with the little cells of the Volvox with their constricted ends. And I've drawn things like this many, many times for my work.
Yeah.
But here, it looks like each cell is an individual creature.
Yeah.
Is each cell an individual creature?
Well, so this is the fascinating thing about Volvox and why. So Volvox is a model system for the origins of multicellularity. So it's related to Chlamydomonas, which is a single cell algae. And so each of these cells that they're in the schematic in E and that are shown in D are essentially a little Chlamydomonas cell. But these cells, when they get stressed, they glob up and they create these little colonies called pomeloids. And the thought is that if they are stressed for long enough, that's what led to the emergence of the Volvox, where they're all stuck together. And now they have these somatic cells on the outside, which is what is shown in E. And then they have these germ cells on the inside.
But how globed, both the electron microscopy in D and the illustration in E, make it look like they're just kind of touching, that they're just kind of globed onto each other. Like when you do this
well, so there's a big extracellular matrix.
That you can't see in the electron microscopy in D?
Right. So, well, is D electron microscopy? I don't think it is. It says light micrograph shows semi-thin sections of V. So I think it's sectioned Volvox embryos, but just via light microscopy.
Okay.
So you can't see the extracellular. It's transparent.
And so the fact that the extracellular is transparent makes me think that it's kind of sparse.
I think it's
like the
gooey,
epithelium.
Right? It's like collagen or something. It's like a hydrogel. That's always been my impression. And then here's something I learned and didn't know was that each cell is linked to its neighbors by a network of cytoplasmic bridges, the membrane tubes resulting from incomplete cell division. And so this is what allows the cells to talk to each other.
Can mitochondria move through those bridges?
I have no idea, right?
Yeah, so one thing we could do, again, it kind of requires two laser lines, actually.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah, is we could do this exact thing, but look at the mitochondria and see if they have this light up during their curvature event.
Yeah, that is, I think, the obvious experiment to do. And we could do that with our single laser line.
Yeah,
and just not have the cell density marker and just see what we see. But yeah.
Okay, pretty short paper. Anything else you want to talk about?
So, I mean, I think we've touched on most of the things I wanted to talk about. I would love to see the energy in this system. A question that's still, I mean, I asked it at the beginning and I'll just bring it up again, is like, why do this whole inversion process? It seems like such a dramatic change. It must be energetically really easy, I guess is what you're saying, for it to be such a common motif. But it seems like the only biological purpose is to bring the flagella to the outside to enable motility. So this is going from essentially having a hatching event for these embryos so that they can swim away from their mother. But that does not seem like the easiest way to do this.
Maybe it just turns out that it's very hard to build yourself originally with your flagella pointing on the outside, right? Building is a tricky thing, right? And so... Yeah,
I don't know. I would be interested to watch the whole process.
If there's anything in kind of multi-organ organisms where any sheet inverts at some point during development. It does seem like a pretty violent...
It's a huge change, right?
Yeah.
And then I was also thinking you're changing what's your inside and outside, so maybe it's important to turn over this... We're talking about this extracellular goop that holds everything together. Maybe there's some important stuff to turn over there. And then, the other thing that this paper made me think was like, I used to be so excited about plants. And exactly for this reason, I thought that these would be the interesting problems to think about of like, okay, now we have very limited cell motility. We can really make very simple models to capture the morphodynamics of these creatures. And it's just so dull.
I think it's so dull because people don't heavily consider trying to predict the timescales.
Yeah.
And once you try to predict the timescales, you have to get the viscoelasticity right.
Yeah.
Once you try to predict the timescales, you have to get the activity right.
Yeah.
And now you're in places where physics has a lot of trouble of energy injection into a system. Because that's more or less impossible to do because nobody has done any physics, right? You're back to like trying to derive stat mech all over again.
Yeah, then showing that this is like the viscoelasticity is changing in space and time is like a really impossible thing to do.
And so, right, people do the simpler stuff and so it becomes boring.
Yeah.
But I think that's where we're going to be for a long time, that the active matter work has to really create robust machinery that people are willing to come back to these problems and predict timescales from activity and viscoelasticity.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I do wonder if there's like an organ, like, some part of the eye or the ear that flips when it's developing in like a mouse or something.
Yeah.
It'd be really cool.
Yeah.
If you could add one thing to this paper, what would it be?
Yeah, we've talked about like viscoelasticity. That would be what would make this beautiful, looking at the constriction. I mean, based off of your work, right? Like, is that a similar mechanism to what's happening in the Drosophila and the chicken and the mouse?
I think if I was to add one thing to this paper, it would be I would beef up the way that the data is shown in figure 2. I would go, they say that the invagination goes for longer, and I would average the lines in a statistical way where I could make statistical arguments for both A, B, and C about what the curves are really doing. It might be that they are the correct things to do, but I'm not convinced that doing the area and the curvature are the right things to measure here, or the only right things to measure. Like, I would like to also see other parameters, such as the volume and some decomposition of curvatures. And yeah, I think that there are other parameters that might be interesting here that they could show in the same way, that just with the data they already have, I think that we could have done a little bit more. And also I would have, maybe these are really hard events to capture, and this is not an experimental paper, but
I don't think the events are hard to capture, but it sounds like they were doing all of this analysis by hand.
Yeah,
and so I think that was probably a limiting factor.
Yeah. So yeah, I would have liked figure 2 to be a little bit more robust, which I think in a theoretical paper, the one experimental figure not being robust is kind of to be expected. So, and for Pierre, I think it's the right amount of work. But again, if I could have anything, if dream in the sky, it would be really robust analysis of the experimental data.
I just wanted to point out that in this figure 2b, they show the geometry over time at the bottom.
Yeah.
And that the flipping really happens in 20 minutes after 0. That like after that point, how are you measuring E over E0?
I see what you're talking about. And I was thinking about it as I was saying it. So like find a way to talk about things that goes
for the whole time scale.
For the whole time scale. Yeah. If the biggest thing that you're talking about is E, and E is the one thing that you're measuring that you can't talk about after 20 minutes, find something else to talk about that's similar. Like an arc length, right? They talk about S, the arc length.
Yeah.
That might be a good thing to talk about. Anything. Anyway, something like that.
Yeah. Cool.
Would you like to talk to Asia about why you were interested in Volvox and the dynamics of Volvox turning themselves inside out?
Yeah, I mean, I find Volvox a fascinating organism because they're so closely related to clammy, but they have these cells that are so much larger. So this embryo is 70 to 100 microns across. And that's a much larger structure than the chlamydomonas, which are, 5 to 10 microns. And so I think that leads to a lot of interesting intracellular questions. It also is like the way that I could move from a single cell mindset to a multicellular creature. And so I've been interested in Volvox for that reason, just to break out of, there's always the fear of getting into an intellectual rut, right? And Volvox is a way to get out of that, to look at it and see what dynamics are beautiful there. And so that's why I've been interested in Volvox generally. And yeah, again, like I said this at the beginning when we were talking about why I picked this paper, is that this is a paper that overlaps the fields of algal biology and active matter physics. And so I'm always looking for other people with similar mindsets who are studying biology. And so I thought this paper would be a good one to read. And then again, it's a short paper with a digestible message. And that's always something that I find beautiful. What did you think of this opening sentence?
Oh, I really disliked that.
Oh, yeah.
Because so the opening sentences to this paper, I've highlighted in red, is this common Lewis Wolpert quote, right? This is a very common quote in developmental biology. It is not birth, marriage, or death, but gastrulation, which is truly the most important time in your life. Which, first of all, I don't think is a good quote for anybody to say. I think it's a garbage thing. And it's thrown out so much in development. Fine, whatever. Each person to their own. But this is not gastrulation. Again, to talk about this in the terminology as if this was like a fruit fly or a chicken or a mouse or something, I think is to really do a disservice to what this system is and to what the other systems are, right? I don't think that this is gastrulation. I really think that that's not an appropriate analogy.
Okay.
You think this is gastrulation?
No, I tried to ask this at the beginning.
Oh, okay.
Which was like, they're saying that this is a motif that is seen across developmental biology of this flipping, cell sheet flipping.
A cell sheet, a sphere inverting is not a motif, right? The motif here is that a small bend by constriction of one side of cells creates a deformation to a thin sheet. That's the motif.
But the flipping is not.
The flipping is, I don't know of a system that's higher that does this kind of inversion thing. Okay. But then I don't know of a system that's higher that's shaped like a perfect sphere with a tiny hole at the top.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Bye.